Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I see folks are just coming on. We'll give everyone a second to do that. Welcome. Thank you for coming on earlier Thursday morning. Feel free to start introducing yourself in the chat. We're going to get started with that ourselves too. So just share your name, your pronouns, your campus, and your position if you'd like. Okay, yeah, I see a lot of like familiar faces. Oh, chat is disabled. Oh no, okay. I did not realize that was the case. Thank you so much for putting that on there. We are just gonna roll with that. If that is the case, we can actually put some stuff in the Q&A also if needed. But we are just gonna go ahead and get started with our webinar for today. But thank you all. Welcome to our Building Effective Support for UndocuEducators in Higher Education. Even though you cannot see each other, I do see a lot of folks from both within different California colleges and universities, and even from beyond that, so welcome. I'm going to get us started with just some introductions. My name is Madeline Villanueva. I am the Higher Education Specialist with Immigrants Rising. This topic that we're actually going to be talking about today around undocumented educators is very close and dear to my heart. I'm actually a current DACA recipient and have previously served as an UndocuEducator for an institution here in California. And my work at Immigrants Rising have also allowed me to interact, get to know, and just work with a lot of other undocumented educators here in California. I do co-lead an UndocuEducators group with my co-facilitator, who's going to introduce herself in a minute. And through that work, I really just built community with other UndocuEducators here in California and gotten a chance to just know about the amazing things we bring to our institutions and just some of the challenges that we're also facing that we're going to talk to you all about today. But Maria, would you also like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Maria Barragan, pronoun she, her, ella. I am the UndocuEducators group co-facilitator with Immigrants Rising and also the program facilitator / Undocu liaison with Cerritos College. Prior to Cerritos, I was at Cal State San Bernardino, where I also served in an UndocuEducator role. So this topic is really dear to my heart as someone who is an UndocuEducator.
Thank you, Maria. And we also just want to give a quick introduction of Immigrants Rising as well. If you don't know us yet, we are a nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And here is our mission around empowering undocumented people to achieve educational and career goals through personal, institutional, and policy transformation. And I think when we talk about our work in higher education, a lot of it, which makes sense, has been centered around making sure undocumented students themselves are able to pursue higher education, right? And that educators and administrators and practitioners are able to have the tools and knowledge that they need in order to build these services and resources for our students. But I think with this work here that we're talking about, and specifically around undocumented educators, we do also want to expand and raise awareness that undocumented people now, because of programs like DACA and just being able to change their status, have also been able to serve as professionals in our institutions, right? And really want to expand that support of undocumented people in higher education also to those educators who are supporting our students as well. And so I'm going to skip this slide because we're having issues, or we're not able to get the chat going, but you are also still able to introduce yourself and your institution and things like that in the Q&A portion. And I actually also realized that I did not get this poll. I was not able to include this poll on here. But we do know that folks who are watching today identify as UndocuEducators, have supported undocumented students on their campus, or serve as faculty, administrator, or just like service providers in the different community organizations in our regions. But since we don't have that, I'm just gonna have us go on to just our purposes and outcomes for today. And we do really hope, oh, actually, I see that the chat is on. Okay, so the chat is open. So feel free for folks to also, let me go back and give folks just a chance to introduce themselves too. So we actually know who's in the chat, who's in the room with us. I see folks from Chaffey College are with us, Skyline College, Northern Virginia Community College, UCLA, lots of community colleges, right? San Jose State, San Diego Miramar, CSUN, Ute College. Thank you so much. Thank you for just bearing with some of that technical difficulties. You can't always take care of everything in Zoom right away. I see some folks from out of state also, from CUNY. Welcome. Yeah, thank you all. So please keep introducing yourselves in the chat to Scripps College. And with that, I did also just want to share our purpose and outcomes for today. And it really is to make sure to raise awareness of the experiences of undocumented educators in higher education. We know that UndocuEducators also exist within the K-12 system, and they have their own unique experiences and challenges and support that they need to. And I believe other organizations like ImSchools and Teach for America have done a lot to support that population. So feel free to check them out too beyond this webinar if you have not already. But we also do hope that you walk away with some tangible steps to support undocumented educators, to support the retention and success of UndocuEducators in your campus. And just some outcomes we have also for today is to make sure that our audience understands the experience of and contributions of UndocuEducators in higher education, to get some of those tangible recommendations and the individual actions to build that institutional support, and to learn how to secure commitments from individuals on your campus to actualize the recommendations. And we have some really great panelists who are with us today, who also help speak to some of those things too, and they'll get a chance to introduce themselves later as well. And so we're just gonna get started with naming who are UndocuEducators, right? And for the purpose of this webinar, and for the purpose of our resource as well, we are focusing on individuals who are working in higher education, who are formerly and currently undocumented. And this often includes those who have work authorization through DACA, for example, or TPS even, and those who don't have permanent status yet and are actually in the process of adjusting their immigration status. And UndocuEducators can really occupy a lot of different positions on our campuses and can include staff, faculty, and administrators. But in our experience and in our group too, as I'll go over earlier, they do tend to be most visible when working directly with undocumented students at Dream Resource Centers or undocumented student programs. Folks have shared with me too, right, that like coming out to their students have helped build that trust and help them be able to better connect their students to the different resources and services that's available to them. And I also threw out this number here. In 2017, the Migrant Policy Institute found that 7,600 of DACA recipients nationwide work in education. And so some UndocuEducators, right, come out of this number. This includes also K-12 folks, and there's about 2,100 in California and 700 in New York. And so this number could have fluctuated, right, since 2017. But I did want to kind of pull this out because when we also, we might not know UndocuEducators ourselves, but we are out here and we are in these different campuses, and I want to kind of show that number a little bit with this too. And I do also want to just give a shout out and say that a lot of the findings and information and recommendation and experiences we're sharing with you all today has really been informed by our UndocuEducators group here at Immigrants Rising. This is a space that was founded by Pamela Ortiz Cerda, who was an UndocuEducator herself back in 2018, to provide that community and supportive space for undocumented professionals working in higher education. I know, like, as somebody who was super active in her undergrad and had a community of undocumented students when she was pursuing college, she found the shift to being the only undocumented person again in her professional life a little jarring, and started asking, like, how can we build support for each other and find each other in these higher education institutions. And so she founded that group back in spring 2018, and this is a picture, I think, from one of the early meetings of other UndocuEducators in California. And we have continued this space virtually. Since then, we have about 30 participants from California community colleges, CSU, UC, and private universities that we engage with regularly now. And our monthly meetings are rooted in 3 pillars of community building, professional development, and self-care and institutional change. And this has been expanded. We have been slowly expanding this in California, right? We had previously only provided to our grant-funded campuses, but in this past year, we have expanded to try to recruit more undocumented educators to be able to connect and learn from each other. And I think the common thing that this group has really shown me, right, is the special, like, commitment and drive that UndocuEducators feel like, especially when they're serving undocumented students themselves. Specifically since many of the UndocuEducators from our group kind of came to college when there was no resources really available, when there was no centers, no designated staff funded and created yet in their campuses. And we had to do a lot of navigating higher education on our own, looking things up, figuring things out on our own. And so I think a lot of UndocuEducators are in this role to be like, I want it better and easier for my students moving forward. And so I'm going to be that resource that I didn't necessarily have when I was going through my own higher education. And I think that special drive kind of thing that UndocuEducators really bring into their work is summed up by this really great quote from a panel in the 2021 success convening, and I'm going to read it out right now. And it says, "I'm in a different position now. I'm a staff member. I can work closely with my supervisor, who is extremely supportive, to make the support happen for our students. They need to worry about school. They need to worry about what to do after graduation. They don't need to worry about how to train their staff and faculty on how to best support them. That's my job. That's what I'm doing." And that's from Cindy Agustin, who is an UndocuEducator from the University of Chicago. And I think this quote really just shows the kind of like commitment and passion that UndocuEducators, as folks from the same lived experiences, are able to bring into their work too, regardless of whether or not they are supporting undocumented students only. And yeah, and so I think we also have just been able to bring a lot, right, to our roles as undocumented people able to thrive and work at these higher education institutions. Those lived experiences, special expertise, and cultural competency has really helped us effectively guide our students. And by being part of these institutions, we have helped build environments that include, retain, and welcome undocumented and first generation students. And for UndocuEducators who specifically work with undocumented students, many have shared just the different ways that they have built innovative solutions to build and strengthen their undocumented programs, given all of the continuing uncertainty that our community faces today. But I think even with all of that, there's a lot of challenges, both that have come up from this group and from my co-facilitators' personal experiences, that actually make it really hard for UndocuEducators to even stay in their role, and to stay in their role or even thrive in their role, right? And what does it mean for our institutions? What does it mean for our students when undocumented educators are not in these roles and are not able to continue their jobs in guiding our students? And so we're going to go over in a minute just the challenges that have come up for our group members and for ourselves. And I'm actually going to pass it over to my co-facilitator, Maria, to get us started.
Thank you, Madeline, for all that. So we do want to also name, a lot of this things that we mentioned are inspired by the members of the UndocuEducators group, and also, again, like our personal experiences. Some of the challenges that UndocuEducators face, they do tend to I guess you can say they intersect, right? Because, for example, if there is limited funding and lack of budget transparency, then it also leads to them not having the accurate classification for their positions. And it just goes on and on until, we get to the sixth challenge that we named today. If we can go ahead and go to our next slide so we can go more in depth into some of these challenges. So one of the challenges that UndocuEducators face is limited funding and lack of budget transparency. I think it's important to name that a lot of times undocumented student centers have limited funding, and this we do want to acknowledge that, there are many areas within higher education that face this challenge, but this impacts undocumented educators because a lot of times they are having to get creative, they are having to be placed in part-time roles, and they are just not given the proper resources to serve their undocumented students. And then we also go into the lack of budget transparency where, from personal experience, I have noticed that there is a lot of miscommunication, or a lot of my peers are unaware of the funding allocations that have been provided by the state to serve undocumented students in the community colleges. So, and if they are aware of these fundings, they are unsure of the amount that they are receiving, or they are unsure of the ways that this funding is being recommended for them to be used, right? And like I said, I do understand that a lot of times in different areas, there is, a lack of funding, a lack of budget transparency, but this really impacts our undocumented educators. If we can go to the next challenge. We also see one of the challenges being inaccurate classification for our positions. And a lot of times it's due to the lack of traditional work experiences. So we do need to acknowledge that when UndocuEducators take on these roles, a lot of times prior to this, they didn't have DACA. So a lot of the work that they did was on a volunteer basis, right? But because it is on a volunteer basis, it's oftentimes not classified as professional experience or professional experience within higher education, even if the volunteer work that they did was within this area. And then undocumented educators tend to get hired in a temporary or lower paid positions that don't reflect their expertise. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that, because of this, they are viewed as having like less intellectual capital, and that is why they're also classified in like lower paid positions. But I do want to name something that I think it's important, because undocumented student centers are fairly new. And a lot of times we talk about best practices or promising practices to serve undocumented students, but we don't acknowledge, or we don't give the credit that the undocumented educators are the ones implementing these best practices. So we talk about them and we say, they don't bring a lot of experience, but yet we see them doing the work, and we see them creating and being innovative in the different ways that they can acknowledge their students. And we can also say, yes, there has been, allies, and we appreciate you and we love your support, especially when you write your dissertations or when you publish work around the ways that we support undocumented students. But sometimes we don't acknowledge that the people who are implementing these practices, or the people that are creating these practices, are our community, are our undocumented educators, are our undocumented students, and basically our undocumented community at large. If we can go to the next challenge. So then there's also the lack of cross-departmental collaboration to address student issues. So undocumented educators are often considered responsible for meeting all of the needs of our undocumented students. And while I want to understand and acknowledge that having a one-stop shop is extremely useful for our students so that they don't have to jump around from one area to the other, this creates a challenge for us, because then people, when they are experiencing or are communicating with a student that is experiencing a challenge within their department, as soon as the student mentions, oh, I'm undocumented, then they get referred to the Undocumented Student Center. And rather than, so I want to mention that rather than making that referral, which yes, is extremely useful for us as well, is like, how can we collaborate to identify how you can also be a resource for the undocumented student within your department? And I think having this challenge really creates an environment where undocumented educators are overworked and end up feeling burned out. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Madeline to talk about the next challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria, for that. And as mentioned, a lot of these challenges, right, are like really interconnected, right? And we know that it is a bigger systemic kind of issue, but are kind of uplifting and highlighting just the specific effects that it has on our undocumented educator community that makes it really hard for us to just, once we have these roles, to actually stay and be able to like succeed in these roles too. Another challenge I'll also mention, and has been really brought up, and I think has felt really heavy in the last year in general, just with the DACA roller coaster that we've been in, is that there's also often a lack of awareness in institutions around the impact of immigration status on undocumented educators, right? And this includes both the legal implications and what it means for our mental health or even our finances and things like that. I think for the most part, the awareness around the impacts of DACA on students, for example, right, are very known in institutions, I think, at this point. But that same kind of like acknowledgement is not often given to undocumented educators who may have DACA in these institutions. I think I remember back to the DACA backlogs that we were experiencing in the past year. And many undocumented educators were just really anxious and nervous about, what does this mean for my position if my renewal doesn't come on time? Many of them, unfortunately, I've heard a couple of stories from folks who they were just not able to continue in their role because their institution was not able to figure out a way, you know, to address what was happening with the backlog, and it was a bigger systemic issue. And so they had to be let go. But there were also some institutions, right, who worked with their educators who were able to find a way to kind of address the renewal situation, or not having a renewal at that point. But that's not often the case for a lot of undocumented educators, right? And even though institutions have really improved their legal support of undocumented students here in California, the same legal services or benefits are often not given to undocumented and documented staff members and faculty and practitioners on those same campuses. And we're often left to kind of come up with our own solutions when legal policies or different things related to that affect our livelihood. Similarly, you know, a lot of this, as we know, takes a really big toll on undocumented people in general, like a really big physical and mental health kind of toll on people. And because a lot of undocumented educators, right, are given these temporary or part-time kind of positions, we don't often have access to like the right healthcare options to even take care of ourselves when things like this come up. I have actually been offered a position within a college for an undocumented support, undocumented student support personnel position that I was really excited and willing to take, but they let me know that, you know, because you're only going to be working a specific number of hours for the week, we actually will not be able to offer you healthcare. And so I had to make the hard decision to turn down that job, because at that point in my life, I was not willing to not have healthcare options anymore. And I know undocumented folks have kind of, as an undocumented person, I think I've learned to kind of like navigate life without health insurance for different parts of my life. But that shouldn't really be the case anymore when we have these positions and we're being asked to support students in these ways. And we're not getting that same physical and mental health support and having a hard time kind of prioritizing our well-being. And then I just think lastly, a lot of these challenges are really down to the point of like that there's not a lot of recognition for UndocuEducators as directly impacted individuals themselves. I've heard a lot of stories from our group and even from my own relationships with other undocumented professionals, especially those who are supporting undocumented students, right? When something happens related to the undocumented community, they're always the first one to be asked to create a service, to issue a messaging, to basically support their students. This happened in the case of when Trump was first elected or when the DACA program was first rescinded. They're always the first one tasked with kind of responding to those, but they're not, they don't find that same support anywhere else on their campus. I think I've heard somebody talk about being asked to like deal with their own emotions in their own home, in their own space before coming to work, so that by the time they come to work, they're ready to show up for their students. And I think that really just adds to the mental toll and the physical toll of having to do this job while not finding that same support from your colleagues or supervisors or institutions. And so I know there's a lot that we shared right now too, right? I'm wondering if there's any, like comments or questions that's coming up for folks in the chat. We can also take a minute to address some of that before moving on into our next section. Yeah, that's a really great question, right? I see a comment in the chat. Does anyone's college or district pay for their staff's DACA or other immigration related fees? I know that companies such as Starbucks pay DACA fees for their employees. Yeah, and so I do also want to give credit that I do think like folks from the California community colleges have been able to get their DACA renewal funds paid for, right? And I do believe that the bigger CCC community college, the California Community College District does provide legal services also to their staff alongside their students. But again, that's like not a common practice in California. Even in California, I also worked for an institution that did not pay for my DACA renewal back when I was supporting undocumented students too. So yeah, great. And it does seem like CSUs also are able to provide that same benefits to their UndocuEducators, which is good. Yeah, and I see this question around, would you say the same applies to to student leaders dedicated to assisting undocu students and educators? I'm wondering if this is like, I do think that a lot of the challenges are also similar for undocumented student staff members who are also working on our campuses, right? But I do think that given that they have that student title and that everybody, as they should be, is really about like supporting students, that visibility is a little bit higher for them too. Okay. I see a couple other things in the chat going on, some resources that folks are sharing, but I'm going to continue on just to our next couple slides to get us moving. And I think even just with all those different challenges and experiences that we heard, we do also just want to share some recommendations to build more institutional support for undocumented educators, as well as individual actions that key stakeholders on campuses can do to strengthen this support too. And thankfully, we do have this really great guide and other resources on our website that basically goes over a lot of what I had mentioned in the overview, and will provide some of the recommendations that we're going to be going over next. And we have these really great one-sheet action plans that are targeted for supervisors of UndocuEducators, HR, Undocu task force members, administrators, and presidents and chancellors of different colleges and universities to learn what individual steps they can take as a person in their campus to build this institutional support for undocumented educators. And I think Nancy also threw that link in the chat for folks to be able to check that out. And so I'm going to pass it over again to Maria to just get us started with some of these campus recommendations.
Thank you, Madeline. So I'll go ahead and go over 3 of the recommendations, and then I'll pass it back to Madeline to go over the next 3. One of the ones that I think is extremely important is to allocate adequate funding. So ensuring that you have the funding that is equitable and aligns with the institution's mission to support students while retaining your current staff members. I think it's important to ask yourself, is there additional equity dollars that can be used? Is there HSI funding? How can we strategically present the needs to the cabinet to ensure that appropriate funding is allocated for this, not only these positions, but to serve students? And like I mentioned before, the state has allocated funding for the community colleges. So how are we using that funding to ensure that our staff members are getting paid adequately, but also any not enough funding, how can we touch on other funding sources to ensure that our students are also being properly served? If we can go to our next recommendation. Classify the roles accurately. So support and advocate for the appropriate classification or reclassification of all undocumented student support staff across California or other states, because I do see other folks from other states, higher education institutions to align with their job responsibilities. If we can go to our next one. And then share responsibility campus-wide. So make sure that you establish liaisons in key departments and expand or build on the Undocu task forces or advisory boards for some of you to share responsibilities and educate other staff members about undocumented issues. And now I'll go ahead and pass it to Madeline to talk about the next recommendations.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And just on the topic, right, of addressing the impact of immigration status, and I see that it's also been talked about in the chat, right, that it is possible to provide those same legal support and fee assistance, right, to undocumented educators in a specific system. And so it should be possible to do it similarly throughout all the systems, especially here in California, when we're able to provide legal services to students too. And that benefit should also be able to transfer to undocumented folks who are supporting those students. And so we do call on campuses to just promote awareness and understanding about how some of these immigration policies affect us, specifically with this upcoming DACA election, right? Our action plans being also developed when it comes to documented staff and employees of our colleges. I think even here in Immigrants Rising, we have a lot of documented staff members, right? We are not really sure what the solution is should a negative decision from this DACA court case come about, but it's a conversation we're starting to have with our staff and with our leadership. And so even thinking about that for your UndocuEducators on your campus, because I'm sure that there's a lot of messaging, a lot of like resources available to students who are within our campus, but do DACA employees on your campus, for example, know what's going to happen should that court decision turn out negative for us. We also call on campuses to just offer suitable health benefits. And again, this is a bigger systemic thing, right? But just with the different loads that UndocuEducators also carry in our roles and things like that, we call on campuses to allocate funding for these adequate health benefits. And if not possible, how about creating partnerships with organizations that assist undocumented folks in finding accessible healthcare options and making sure that these are promoted to UndocuEducators and other documented staff that is on that's in your institution. And then lastly, and what we're really hoping that this webinar sparks for us today is just the recognition of UndocuEducators as undocumented people first too. Again, we are all here to, support students and to make sure that they are able to navigate and handle the uncertainties that come with being undocumented in today's world. But we are also affected by a lot of these similar challenges that they're facing, and that needs to be more visibilized. We call on campuses to really build awareness and understanding of these challenges and also what UndocuEducators bring to their campuses. And if helpful, right, provide them with professional development opportunities designed for them, including things like our UndocuEducators group. And we'll promote that a little bit more in our later slides too, but I have heard really from a lot of our group members just the power of being able to connect with other UndocuEducators across the state and just build community with them and even figure out what kind of solutions we'd want to see from our institutions when it comes to some of these problems that has come up for us. And I'm going to pass it over for Maria to kind of expand on some of these individual actions too that we talked about in our resource.
So some of the individual actions that folks can take for supervisors is providing support through your regular check-ins and ensuring that you offer monthly goal-oriented meetings and one-on-one. So, basically provide mentorship for the UndocuEducators that you serve. And then also collaborate with campus entities to create action plans should an UndocuEducator status change. I think this is important and extremely crucial, especially for the supervisor. I don't think that this responsibility should fall on the UndocuEducator should DACA, be taken away, or if negative decision were to come with DACA. I think that our institution should start preparing should anything happen to ensure that you retain the UndocuEducators. And then if we can go to the recommendations for undocumented task force or advisory group members, we ask that you continue to advocate for sustainable personnel and programmatic budget allocations. We are extremely grateful for a lot of the task force and advisory group members that have advocated for undocumented student support services. And I think the ask is, now that we do have especially UndocuEducators in this role, is how can we continue advocating so that we can have additional staff members to support this role, and also sharing responsibilities and tasking to ensure that not all undocumented related things are handled by one center or program. I must say that, I really do appreciate one of my task force members who is constantly checking up on me when things are not going so well, or really asking like, hey, how can I help? How can I take this on? So I hope that more task force members do that for more undocumented educators. Madeline?
Right. And I also did want to mention that these individual actions are just some of the ones that we had in relation to the challenges already named. If you'd like to see more of them for these specific key stakeholders, we do have those action plans that kind of breaks this down a little bit more. And we do also ask people, like after this webinar, right, check out all these resources, share them with folks on your campus, and kind of maybe get a conversation started or going about what kind of action folks are able to take when it comes to UndocuEducators on their campus. And so we do have a specific action plan for HR, specifically, as we've heard from our group and just our own personal experiences. HRs across the campuses do tend to have like different, honestly, like expertise and processes when it comes to working with undocumented folks who have DACA or work authorization, for example. And so we do call on them to ask them to implement a straightforward and equitable hiring and onboarding process for UndocuEducators, and even come up with just different practices when asking UndocuEducators about their work authorization expiring, right? That do not center fear or lack of support. I think this one's a really big one, as I've also heard stories from our group of the nerve-wracking situation that they've also been put in sometimes when HR asks for their DACA renewals, for example, or just the back and forth that happens because sometimes they need to educate their HR, for example, when it comes to renewal and those things. And so thinking about too for your campus, what kind of processes are around HR policies when it comes to UndocuEducators. And then lastly, we do recognize that administrators are also able to help a lot and move a lot of these recommendations, including working with HR to create some of these onboarding processes, onboarding and hiring processes, and even just making sure that the funding is there for proper classification, fair compensation, and adequate staffing of our UndocuEducators. And so with that, I do also want to pass it back to Maria, just to also introduce some other speakers we have who can talk a little bit more about these experiences too.
Thank you. So today with us, we have Julio Reyes Cabeza, who's a student success specialist for the Grads to Be program at Fullerton College. So if Julio, you can come on camera. And then we also have Dr. Norma Salcedo, who's the director of the Dream Success Center at CSU Long Beach. If you can also come on camera. Thank you so much. I'm gonna ask, if you can please introduce yourself, your name, position, campus, and if you feel comfortable sharing if you are an UndocuEducator or your connection to undocumented educators. Julio, if you would like to go first.
Yes, I can. Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you so much, Madeline, and everyone for allowing me to be part of this space. As mentioned, my name is Julio Reyes Cabezas. I go by he, him pronouns, and I currently work at Fullerton College. And I identify as an UndocuEducator, thanks to the privilege of being able to work under Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which I mean has been really helpful for me and has really given me the opportunity to be part of a space that has really empowered a lot of UndocuEducators in the space and has created a lot of these efforts. And I'm really thankful for the space because of the fact that oftentimes we are trying to look out for our students that we may often forget about ourselves. So I really appreciate all of the work that Madeline and Maria have been able to provide in creating this space for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Julio. I second everything that you said. Dr. Salcedo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm Dr. Norma Salcedo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the current director of the Dream Success Center at California State University, Long Beach. I've been working directly with undocumented student resource centers for the past 7 years. Previously, I was working at San Francisco State University and now here at Long Beach. I don't identify as an UndocuEducator. I identify more as an ally and as someone who is always striving to hire more and more UndocuEducators so that I can lead the way to this work.
Thank you, Dr. Salcedo. We really appreciate you uplifting the voices of UndocuEducators. Julio, if you can share with us, what are you most proud of as an UndocuEducator?
Yes, of course. I think for me, I am most proud about being an UndocuEducator, because I feel it's like a full circle opportunity being able to work with students that I can closely relate to and provide guidance and support. And I find a lot of pride in being able to support students because of the fact that I was once in their shoes and didn't have that support, specifically at the community college level, where there was not a lot of resources and opportunities. I think this is also an opportunity for me to share my knowledge that I've gained throughout my years in higher education, through an asset-based lens. That in the past, like, you know, we go through higher ed and we kind of have this deficit thinking framed, like, and thinking like, oh, you know, we don't have these things, we're limited, we have all of these things. But through this position, through these opportunities, I get to see the resources and the opportunities that are available for our students, and being able to provide that, and sharing that, you know, they are more than their immigration status. And there are resources out there to help them navigate higher education and provide these opportunities to them. And I think it ties into my last reason as to why I'm proud to be an undocumented educator, and being able to inspire other students, you know, to reach their goals, being able to bring that visibility, the representation. I think it's big shoes to fill in, but I hope that as I work with students, I'm able to inspire them and help them to reach all of their personal goals that they may have. Because sometimes, you know, we may not have that hope due to the limitations that come through these policies. But I hope that through working with me and helping them, I'm able to help them gravitate towards more of an asset-based thinking.
Thank you so much for that, Julio. I think it's important to also, you know, name and highlight what you shared of how you had to navigate the system as a student, and now you're navigating it as a staff member, but all of the knowledge and all of the experience that you bring with you because of the different ways that you had to navigate, you know, your status as a student, and now, you know, in your current role. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Salcedo, if you can share, what do UndocuEducators bring to your department or institution?
Yeah, they bring their knowledge, their expertise, their own experiences. We really could not do this work without individuals who have the experience that the students are facing. Like the students know when I talk to them, I let them know, like, I'm an ally. I don't speak for you. I elevate your voices. I put you in these spaces so that you can share your voices. There are, as a director, there are spaces where I have to have those conversations. But if there's a space where my students can be in there, where my UndocuEducators can be in there, I welcome them into that space for them to speak. I know that sometimes they can get a little shy to speak, and I empower them to be the face in different settings so that the students can relate to them. And you see it when these UndocuEducators say, hey, I myself am a documented professional, or an undocumented professional with DACA. The students are able to relate to that and say, wow, like, that could be me one day, right? I can work at this center one day. And we're starting to see students knocking through our doors and saying, how can I get your job one day? How can I work at a center one day? So that is essentially my role. Is I try to create these pathways so that eventually someone takes over, because my hope is not to be a director of this center for the rest of my career. My hope is for one of my former students or one of my UndocuEducators to eventually take over this role. And I'm really fortunate to have those UndocuEducators who are willing to be a resource to the students, who are open to sharing their experiences and their stories, because the students need that sense of belonging. And part of that sense of belonging is seeing people that share similar experiences as them. So I feel very fortunate to have the access to be able to hire, as I know that a lot of institutions only have one person, or sometimes even like 25% of a person or 50% of a person working in this role. So it's definitely a different experience.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's important for me to take a second and really acknowledge what you said, right, about really elevating the voices of undocumented people. I think a lot of times allies, you know, and like I said, please don't take this to heart, but we truly do appreciate your support. But a lot of times, because you have been doing a lot of the work as allies, because our roles are fairly new, when we do tend to come in, a lot of times allies feel like we are taking from them rather than adding to the work that they have been doing, or, you know, the path that they have been paving for undocumented educators. So, you know, if you yourself are an ally in this space, I do call on that action for you to continue to elevate the voices of undocumented people. And this includes undocumented educators. Let's not forget about them. Julio, if you can take a few minutes to share with us, what are the ways that the institution that you currently work for has recognized or sought to support your unique perspective and positionality? And if the institution has not supported you, how have you advocated for yourself or used the recommendations from the resource to advocate for yourself?
Yes, of course. I think to start off, and the positionality that I'm in, being an undocumented professional also means being like a first generation professional, having to navigate a lot of these things for the very first time. So I think something that, Fullerton College has done to support me is giving me the opportunity to work closely with our cultural center coordinator, who also coordinates our undocumented student program, because I feel like if I were alone in this, like, it would have been a lot more difficult to navigate the campus culture, the workplace, the relationships. So I feel he gave me the opportunity to really immerse myself with the community and being able to learn the ins and outs, a bit of the hidden curriculum that oftentimes is not really shared or known when you come into these positions. But I also think, it is a learning curve in me learning about the campus culture, and then also learning about, the undocumented student knowledge that we hold, and being able to share and being able to balance those different types of instances. I think another situation in which I've been supported is also giving me the opportunity to help with making informed decisions on hiring staff based on the needs that I've seen within our students. Throughout the span of my time here, we've been able to hire a mental health therapist. We've been able to hire an outreach events advocate and a marketing events advocate as well, to be able to do more specialized intentions and efforts towards supporting our students, towards supporting our program, based on the needs that I found, or the gaps that I feel were needed, and along with collaboration, of course, with my team. So I think that's been really helpful. Another aspect has been providing legal services, being able to take advantage at the community college. I was seeing the chat earlier, and some of these services may not be offered, like, in different institutions, and that is very unfortunate. And I hope that there's a possibility to be able to do that in the future, because it does come a lot of anxiety in terms of being able to figure out, when I can renew my DACA again, and if those fees are going to be paid for, because it is a big thing, especially if you're working full time, you're going to school, which I'm currently in, and so it's a lot to kind of think about. Now, in terms of like ways that I've advocated for myself, and I think it goes on the same page with Dr. Salcedo, in terms of what she was mentioning, really being able to connect with those individuals that can help uplift my voice. I feel oftentimes there are instances where I'm in a room, and there's, a room of people that are administrators, and, they've done really great work, but even being able to speak out can be very challenging. And I can't speak out in that public space, but maybe, through an email or through just a one-on-one, I can speak my mind to help me understand and process these thoughts, because I think oftentimes it's really important to not speak what we think just there, and also kind of get guidance. And that goes to my next point, and really being able to seek guidance and ask questions. I think a really big part about advocating for ourselves is questioning things, and being able to see, like, how I can improve, or like where I can get certain answers or certain things. I think oftentimes it relates to the transparency that goes behind all of the things that go with the role within our respective roles as undocumented student personnel. So it's really being able to find those people that you trust in the end as well, that they will help you uplift your voice and will help you guide you in a way that is well intended. And sometimes, people may mistake impact with intention, and that's okay, but you also learn from those experiences. So that's another way that you can advocate, by learning and continue to unlearn the things that you've been taught in the past. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Julio. I think it's amazing to highlight that it's so important to ask questions and to not be afraid to ask those questions, because a lot of times in immigrant communities, we have learned that you don't question authority, right? You don't question someone that is above you. And so to unlearn that and to be able to ask questions in order to advocate for ourselves, that is amazing to hear. And so thank you so much for that. Dr. Salcedo, if you can share with us, how have you used your positionality on campus to support undocumented educators?
I think in making sure that they are supported. I know that personally myself, like I worked in positions where I was working 10-hour days, sometimes even 12-hour days. I wasn't taking my lunch. I wasn't taking care of myself. So when I realized that I was in a position where I can supervise someone, I realized that it was really important for me to make sure that their self-care was taken care of, that their well-being is taken care of. So making sure they take their lunch, making sure they're not working over 40 hours. Higher ed has this expectation that if you work hard, then you're worthy of a raise or you're worthy of your position. And it is 2022, and that is not getting us anywhere. We're losing people left and right. Higher ed is in a crisis right now because people are leaving higher ed, UndocuEducators are leaving higher ed. And how I make sure that I support my staff is making sure that they're not overworked, that I advocate for them to have an equitable pay, that I advocate for them to not be in spaces where they may be overworked for projects that they should not be in or committees that they shouldn't be in. I'm very protective of their space, and that's how I come in. I make sure that they are that they don't have to say no themselves. I say no, in different spaces, because I know it's hard. You've been programmed, to say yes to everything, because even I remember as a grad student, it's like, the more you say yes, the more opportunities that come to you. And it's just, that is not sustainable anymore. So I make sure that that there's also, I know there's a lot happening with DACA. I'm bringing up in different spaces. So what's going to happen if DACA gets rescinded? What's going to happen with these educators? And I know that in the CSU system, we've had these conversations, and it's always like, well, we'll see when that happens. But I'm having those thoughts now because I want to make sure that there is a plan in place, that we are being proactive and not reactive, because it may happen at some point. And this is a conversation that we're going to have across different systems. So how are we going to put our mouth, with, our money where our mouth is, right? If we're saying that we're going to be supportive of the undocumented community, that also includes our UndocuEducators. And I know we're out of time, so that's sort of where I wanted to share. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sitting here and I'm like, yes, all of that. I think it's important for, supervisors in this role to really acknowledge the work that we are doing, because a lot of times they don't do that, and we are having to leave the places that we love. And I don't know, Madeline, if you can help me maybe close.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maria, too, right? And I recognize, and thank you, Norma, for that too. I think we really, undocumented educators have been really advocating for themselves since they were students, right? And a lot of this work has also been led by other UndocuEducators. And so we really do call on allies, as Dr. Salcedo is like modeling for us too, right? That we also like really call on you to show up for UndocuEducators in the same ways you have shown up for students, and really make sure that that support is, and that visibility is also there for us too. And we don't want to do this work by ourselves anymore, and really appreciate just like the work that you all have done to at your own campuses, to uplift UndocuEducators as a directly impacted person or as an ally themselves. And so I do see that we're really close to time. We had a lot of great information to share with folks. And so we're just going to wrap up. If we can take maybe another 2 or 3 minutes beyond our time, I'm going to go back to our screen to just kind of close out the space and have folks think about what other actions they can take beyond the webinar today.
So here are some individual actions that you can commit to using our guide. Please use our guide and ensure that your campus, share with your community community partners as well as your campus. Make sure that you deliver action plans to key stakeholders and request commitments and hold them accountable. Incorporate information about UndocuEducators in your UndocuAlly trainings. Again, please don't forget about us because we do exist. Engage your undocumented task force advisory group to increase visibility for UndocuEducators. Create action plans with and for UndocuEducators regarding the pending DACA decision. Please don't leave these plans for your UndocuEducators. Make sure that you release a statement of support for UndocuEducators and other documented staff members on your campus.
Yeah, I think even just that last part could go a really long way to, or even be a first step, specifically when that DACA decision comes to, right? We're also not, we know that it may be a negative decision. And so make sure that not just your students, but your staff members are informed of what does that mean for them on their own campus.
And we want to invite you to save the date for November 17 to join our Forging Our Path Undocumented Immigrant Educators Speak Up. This is in collaboration with NASPA, Undocumented Immigrant Knowledge Community, Forward, and many, many other amazing organizations doing work to uplift the voices of UndocuEducators. And make sure that if you are an UndocuEducator yourself, that you connect with us, and feel free to email me, and I can make sure to send you all of the details for our UndocuEducators group meetings. We would be more than happy to have you join us and be in community with all of you. And
yeah, I know we're slightly over time too, but we do know that we gave a lot of information for folks here today, and so do want folks to kind of think about just the different ways that they are, what next steps can they take to even just increase visibility, right? Because our community is so underseen on our campuses, but increase visibility and support for UndocuEducators on your campus. Who are you going to talk to after this? Who are you going to share that resource with after this? And we do want to hear from you about how this could be helpful for your work. And we just threw it in the chat, but we have a short evaluation for folks to fill out, and we'll also follow up via email with just the materials we shared with you all today. But we also really want to thank our amazing panelists today, Julio and Dr. Salcedo, for sharing all that they did and for all the work that they do on campus. Here are all our contact informations if folks want to get in touch with anybody, and we do hope we hear from you, not just when that DACA decision comes through, but now too, right? When before things start picking up, like what are the different ways we can really uplift and support undocumented educators on our campus. Oh, I see the evaluation is actually not available, but we're going to go ahead and fix that too. But I also do want to turn it over to Maria to just kind of help close out the space for us.
Thank you all so much, everyone that made the time to be here, to our amazing presenters, to my colleague Madeline, Nancy also. Thank you so much. And most of all to Pam for really, paving the way for UndocuEducators to really navigate the systems in community, but also for teaching us to advocate for ourselves. And I think this is the first step for many of you being here today. Really, this is the first step in your advocacy for UndocuEducators. We are really excited to connect with you all, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, thank you all.